It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead, and we're continuing in our series of books read by Laura Ingalls Wilder. We finished Farmer Boy yesterday, and today we're beginning Little House on the Prairie. So, I'm excited. Chapter 1, Going West. Here's a picture. Do you think you'd like to have been able to travel in a wagon? Well, let's find out what it was like. Going west. A long time ago, when all the grandfathers and grandmothers of today were little boys or little girls, or very small babies, or maybe not even born. In fact, definitely not even born at this point. Pa and Ma and Mary and Laura and baby Carrie left their little house in the big woods of Wisconsin. They drove away and left it lonely and empty in the clearing among the big trees, and they never saw that little house again. They were going to Indian country. Pa said there were too many people in the big woods now. Quite often Laura heard the ringing thud of an axe that was not Pa's axe, or the echo of a gun that did not come from Pa's gun. The path that went by the little house had become a road. Almost every day, Laura and Mary stopped their playing and stared in surprise at a wagon as a wagon slowly went creaking by on that road. Wild animals would not stay in a country where there were so many people. Pa did not like to stay either. He liked a country where the wild animals lived without being afraid. He liked to see the little fawns and their mothers looking at him from the shadowy woods, and the fat, lazy bears eating berries in the wild berry patches. In the long winter evenings, he talked to Ma about the western country. In the west, the land was level, and there were no trees. The grass grew thick and high. The wild animals wandered and fed as though they were in a pasture that stretched farther than a man could see. And there were no settlers. Only Indians lived there. One day, in the very last of winter, Pa said to Ma, "Seeing you don't object, I've decided to go west. I've had an offer for this place, and we can sell it now for as much as we're likely ever to get, enough to give us a good start in the new country." "Oh, Charles, must we go now?" Ma said. The weather was so cold, and the snug house was so comfortable. "If we're going this year, we must go now," Pa said. "We can't get across the Mississippi after the ice breaks." So Pa sold the little house. He sold the cow and the calf. He made hickory bows, hickory's a type of wood, and fastened them upright to the wagon box. Ma helped him stretch the white canvas over them. In the thin dark before morning, Ma gently shook Mary and Laura till they got up. In firelight and candlelight, she washed and combed them and dressed them warmly. Over their long red flannel underwear, she put on wool petticoats, so wool comes from like sheep, and wool dresses and long wool stockings. It was very cold. She put their coats on them and their rabbit skin hoods and their red yarn mittens. Everything from the house was in the wagon except the beds and tables and chairs. They did not need to take these because Pa could always make new ones. There was a thin snow on the ground. The air was still and cold and dark. The bare trees, meaning they didn't have any leaves on them, stood up against the frosty stars, but in the east the sky was pale, and through the gray woods came lanterns with wagons and horses bringing Grandpa and Grandma, aunts and uncles and cousins. Mary and Laura clung tight to the rag dolls and did not say anything. The cousins stood around and looked at them. Grandma and all the aunts hugged and kissed them and hugged and kissed them again and again, saying goodbye. Pa hung his gun to the wagon bows inside the canvas top where he could reach them quickly from the seat. He hung his bullet pouch and powder horn beneath it. He laid the fiddle box carefully between the pillows where jolting would not hurt the fiddle. Jolting is bumping. The uncles helped him to hitch the horses to the wagon. All the cousins were told to kiss Mary and Laura, so they did. Pa picked up Mary and then Laura and set them in the bed in the back of the box of the wagon. He helped Ma climb up to the wagon seat, and Grandma reached up and gave her baby Carrie. Pa swung up and sat beside Ma, and Jack, the brindle bulldog, went under the wagon. So they went away from the little log house. I'm going to show you the picture. How they all came to say goodbye. Back then, it was so hard to travel that they knew they might never see a lot of their family that they loved again because it was just too far, they would be too far away. The shutters were over the windows so the little house could not see them go. It stayed there inside the log fence behind the two big oak trees that in the summertime had made green roofs for Mary and Laura to play under. And that was the last of the little house. Pa promised that when they came to the west, Laura should see a papoose. "What is a papoose?" she asked him, and he said, "A papoose is a little brown Indian baby." They drove a long way through the snowy woods till they came to the town of Pepin. Laura and Mary had seen it once before, but it looked different now. The door of the store and the doors of all the houses were shut. The stumps were covered with snow, and no little children were playing outdoors. Big cords of wood stood among the stumps. Only 2 or 3 men in boots and fur caps and bright plaid coats were to be seen. Ma and Laura and Mary ate bread and molasses in the wagon. Molasses is a dark brown, thick syrup, and it is very sweet, and it's good for you. And the horses ate corn from their nose bags, while inside the store, Pa traded his furs for things that they needed on the journey. They could not stay long in town because they had to cross the lake that day. The enormous lake stretched flat and smooth and white all the way to the edge of the gray sky. Wagon tracks went away across it. So far you could not see where they went. They ended in nothing at all. Pa drove the wagon out onto the ice, following those wagon tracks. The horses' hooves clip-clopped with a dull sound. The wagon wheels went crunching. The town grew smaller and smaller behind, till even the tall store was only a dot. All around the wagon there was nothing but empty, silent space. Laura didn't like it, but Pa said the wagon was on the wagon seat and Jack was under the wagon. She knew that nothing could hurt her while Pa and Jack were there. At last the wagon was pulling up a slope of earth again, and then there were trees. There was a little log house too among the trees, so Laura felt better. Nobody lived in the little house. It was a place to camp in. It was a tiny house, and strange, it had a big fireplace with rough bunks against the wall. But it was warm when Pa built a fire in the fireplace. That night, Mary and Laura and baby Carrie slept with Ma in a bed on the floor before the fire, while Pa slept outside the wagon to guard it and the horses. In the night, a strange noise awakened Laura. It sounded like a shot, but it was sharper and was longer than a shot. Again and again she heard it. Mary and Laura were asleep, or Carrie were asleep, but Laura couldn't sleep until Ma's voice came softly through the dark. "Go to sleep, Laura," Ma said. "It's only the ice cracking." Next morning, Pa said, It's lucky we crossed yesterday, Carolyn. Wouldn't wonder if the ice broke up today. We made a light crossing, and this is what it looks like where they camped. Can you see the little house? And we're lucky it didn't start breaking up while we were out there in the middle of it. I thought of that yesterday, Charles, Ma replied gently. Laura hadn't thought about it before, but now she thought what would have happened if the ice had cracked under the wagon wheels and they'd all gone down into the cold, cold water in the middle of that vast lake. You're frightening somebody, Charles, Mother said, and Pa caught Laura up in his safe big hug. We're across the Mississippi, he said, hugging her joyously. How do you like that little half pint of sweet cider, half drunk up? Do you like going west where Indians live? Laura said she liked it, and she asked if they were in Indian country now. But they were not. They were in Minnesota. It was a long, long way to Indian territory. Almost every day the horses traveled as far as they could. Almost every night Pa and Ma made camp at a new place. Sometimes they had to stay several days in one camp because the creek was in flood, or they couldn't cross it until the water went down. They crossed too many creeks to count. They saw strange woods and hills and stranger country with no trees. They drove across the rivers on long wooden bridges, and they came to one wide yellow river that had no bridge. That was the Mississippi River. Pa drove onto a raft, and they all sat still in the wagon while the raft went swaying from the safe land and slowly crossed on all that rolling, muddy yellow water. And I'll show you what that picture looks like. After more days, they came to hills again. In a valley, the wagon struck fast in deep black mud. Rain poured down and thunder crashed and lightning flared. There was no place to make camp and build a fire. Everything was damp and chill and miserable in the wagon, but they had to stay in it and eat cold bits of food. Next day, Pa found a place on a hillside where they could camp. The rain had stopped, but they had to wait a week before the creek went down and the mud dried so that Pa could dig the wagon wheels out of it and go on. One day while they were waiting, a tall, lean man came out of the woods riding a black pony. He and Pa talked a while. Then they went off into the woods together, and when they came back, both of them were riding black ponies. Pa had traded the tired brown horses for those ponies. They were beautiful little horses, and Pa said they were not really ponies. They were Western Mustangs. They're strong as mules and gentle as kittens, Pa said. They had soft, large, gentle eyes and long manes and tails, and slender legs and feet were much smaller and quicker than the horses that they had in the big woods. When Laura asked what their names were, Pa said that she and Mary could name them. So Mary named one Pet, and Laura named the other Patty. When the creek's roar was not so loud and the road was drier, Pa dug the wagon out of the mud. He hitched Pet and Patty to it, and they all went together. They had come in the covered wagon all the way across the big woods of Wisconsin, across Minnesota and Iowa and Missouri. All that long way. Jack had trotted under the wagon. Now they set out to go across Kansas. Kansas was an endless flatland, covered with tall grass blowing in the wind. Day after day they traveled in Kansas and saw nothing but the rippling grass and the enormous sky. In a perfect circle, the sky curved down to the level of the land, and the wagon was in the circle's exact center. All day long, Pet and Patty went forward, trotting and walking and trotting again, but they couldn't get out of the middle of that circle. When the sun went down, the circle was still around them, and the edge of the sky was pink. Then slowly the land became black. The wind made a lonely sound in the grass. The campfire was small and lost in so much space, but large stars hung from the sky, glittering so near that Laura felt she could almost touch them. Next day the land was the same, the sky was the same, and the circle did not change. Laura and Mary were tired of them all. There was nothing new to do and nothing new to look at. The bed was made in the back of the wagon and neatly covered with a gray blanket. Laura and Mary sat on it. The canvas sides of the wagons were rolled up and tied so the prairie wind blew in. It whipped Laura's straight brown hair and Mary's golden curls every which way, and the strong light screwed up their eyelids. Sometimes a big jackrabbit bounded in big bounds, that's jumps, over the blowing grass. Jack paid no attention. Poor Jack was tired, very tired, and his paws were sore from traveling so far. The wagon kept on jolting. The canvas tops snapped in the wind. Two faint wheel tracks kept going away behind the wagon, always the same. Pa's back was hunched. The reins were loose in his hands and the wind blew in his long brown beard. Ma sat straight and quiet, her hands folded in her lap, baby Carrie asleep in a nest among the soft bundles. Oh, Mary yawned and Laura said, "Ma, can't we get out and run behind the wagon? My legs are so tired." "No, Laura," Ma said. We are going to camp pretty soon." Laura asked, "Aren't we going to?" It seemed such a long time since noon, when they'd eaten their lunch sitting on the clean grass in the shade of the wagon. Pa answered, "Not yet. It's too early to camp now." "I want to camp now. I'm so tired," Laura said. Then Ma said, "Laura." That was all, but it meant that Laura must not complain, so she did not complain any more out loud. But she still was naughty inside. She sat and thought complaints to herself. Her legs ached, and the wind wouldn't stop blowing her hair all over. The grass waved and the wagon jolted, and nothing else happened for a long time. "We're coming to a creek or a river," Pa said. "Girls, can you see those trees ahead?" Laura looked ahead and held to one of the wagon bows. Far ahead she could see a low, dark smudge. "That's trees," Pa said. "You can tell by the shape of the shadows. In this country, trees mean water. That's where we'll camp tonight." And that's the end of the first chapter. Well, Laura's pretty tired of just riding in that wagon so far, after so many days. We will continue in this story again tomorrow. All right, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house and out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. And if you know anybody else that would like this story, make sure and share it. If you put it on Facebook, or your parents put it on Facebook, that would help me to get more subscribers. All right. Have a great night. Bye-bye.